the long haul. It was a chilly autumn night when Tom, a seasoned truck driver, set out on his usual route. The highway stretched endlessly before him, illuminated only by the dim glow of his headlights. He had driven this road countless times, but tonight felt different. The air was thick with an unsettling silence, and the moon hung low in the sky, casting eerie shadows across the asphalt. Tom adjusted his cap and took a deep breath, shaking off the feeling of unease. He had a delivery to make, and the sooner he got on the road, the sooner he could get home to his family. He turned up the radio, the familiar voice of the late-night DJ filling the cab with a sense of normalcy. "Welcome back, night owls. It's a quiet one out there tonight. Just you and the open road. Remember, folks, keep your eyes peeled for anything unusual. You never know what you might encounter on these lonely highways." Tom chuckled to himself, dismissing the DJ's words as mere entertainment. He had seen his fair share of strange things on the road, but nothing could faze him. He was a professional after all. As he drove deeper into the night, the landscape around him began to change. The trees grew denser, and the road twisted and turned, leading him into a remote area he had never encountered before. The GPS on his dashboard flickered, struggling to maintain a signal. "Great," Tom muttered, glancing at the screen. "Just what I need," he pressed on, the sound of the tires on the pavement the only company he had. The radio crackled, and the DJ's voice faded into static. Tom frowned, reaching to adjust the dial, but before he could, the lights on his dashboard flickered ominously. "Come on, don't do this to me," he said, gripping the steering wheel tighter. As he navigated the winding road, Tom noticed something out of the corner of his eye, a flicker of movement in the trees. He turned his head, but there was nothing there. Just shadows dancing in the moonlight. He shook his head, attributing it to fatigue. Hours passed, and the darkness deepened. Tom's eyelids grew heavy, and he fought to stay awake. He reached for a can of energy drink, taking a long swig. The bitter taste jolted him back to reality, but the unease lingered. Suddenly, a figure appeared on the side of the road, illuminated by his headlights. Tom slammed on the brakes, heart racing. It was a woman, standing alone in the darkness, her clothes tattered and her hair disheveled. "What the hell?" Tom muttered, peering out the window. "Are you okay?" The woman didn't respond. Instead, she stared at him with wide, hollow eyes, her expression vacant. Tom's instincts kicked in and he felt a surge of fear. He was trained to help those in need, but something about her presence sent chills down his spine. "Do you need a ride?" he called out, but she remained silent, her gaze fixed on him. Tom hesitated, his heart pounding. He had heard stories of hitchhikers who turned out to be dangerous, but he couldn't just leave her there. He took a deep breath and opened the passenger door. "Get in," he said, trying to sound reassuring. The woman stepped forward, her movement slow and deliberate. As she climbed into the cab, Tom caught a whiff of something foul, like decay. He grimaced, but forced himself to remain calm. "Where are you headed?" he asked, trying to make conversation. "Home," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Okay, let's get you there," Tom said, glancing at her. "What's your name?" "Lila," she said, her eyes darting around the cab as if searching for something. Tom nodded, trying to shake off the feeling of dread that settled over him. He resumed driving, the silence between them growing heavier with each passing mile. As they drove, Tom couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Lila sat rigidly in her seat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. He stole glances at her, noticing the way her eyes seemed to flicker with an unnatural light. "Are you okay?" he asked, concern creeping into his voice. "I'm fine," she replied, but her tone was flat, devoid of emotion. The road stretched on, and the darkness enveloped them. The road stretched on, and the darkness enveloped them. Tom turned on the radio, hoping to break the silence, but it remained static. He frowned, fiddling with the knobs, but nothing changed. "Damn it," he muttered, frustration bubbling to the surface. Lila turned to him, her expression unreadable. "You shouldn't have picked me up." "What do you mean?" Tom asked, confusion washing over him. "People like me, we don't belong here," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Tom's heart raced to wait and not know let a no W's question. "What do you mean, people like you?" But before she could respond, the truck hit a bump and the headlights flickered again. Tom cursed under his breath, gripping the wheel tighter. The unease in the cab grew palpable, and he felt a chill creep up his spine. "Where did you come from?" he asked, trying to keep the conversation going. "From the woods," Lila replied, her gaze fixed on the darkness outside. "I was lost." "Lost?" "What do you mean?" But Lila didn't answer. Instead, she stared out the window, her expression distant. Tom felt a knot form in his stomach, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he had made a mistake by picking her up. As they continued down the road, the atmosphere grew heavier, the air thick with tension. Tom's eyes darted to the rearview mirror, and he froze. A pair of headlights appeared behind them, growing closer and closer. "Who's that?" he muttered, his heart racing. Lila turned to him, her expression unreadable. "It's not safe." "What do you mean?" Tom asked, panic rising in his chest. But before she could respond, the headlights vanished, swallowed by the darkness. Tom blinked, confusion washing over him. "What the hell?" "Keep driving," Lila urged, her voice urgent. Tom pressed on, the unease growing with each passing mile. The road twisted and turned, and the trees loomed closer, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. He felt a sense of dread settle over him, and he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Suddenly, the truck's engine sputtered, and the lights flickered again. Tom cursed, pulling over to the side of the road. "What's wrong with this thing?" Lila's eyes widened, and she leaned closer. "We need to get out of here." "Why?" Tom asked, panic rising in his chest. "Because they're coming," she whispered, her voice trembling. Tom's heart raced as he glanced around, the darkness closing in around them. "Who's coming?" But before she could answer, the headlights reappeared, illuminating the trees. Tom's breath caught in his throat as he saw the figure standing in the road, a tall, shadowy silhouette that seemed to blend into the darkness. "Get back in the truck," he shouted, his heart pounding. Lila didn't move. Instead, she stared at the figure, her expression vacant. It's too late. Tom's instincts kicked in, and he jumped out of the truck, heart racing. "What do you want?" he shouted, his voice echoing in the stillness. The figure stepped forward, revealing a gaunt face with hollow eyes that seemed to pierce through him. "You shouldn't have picked her up," it rasped, its voice a chilling whisper. "Who are you?" Tom demanded, fear coursing through his veins. The figure smiled, revealing sharp teeth that glinted in the moonlight. You're the lost ones. We wander these woods searching for souls to join us." Tom's heart raced as he turned to Lila, but she remained frozen, her gaze fixed on the figure. "Lila, we need to go," he shouted, panic rising in his chest. But she didn't respond. Instead, she stepped forward, her expression vacant. "I belong here," she said, her voice distant. "No," Tom shouted, grabbing her arm. "You don't." The figure laughed, a chilling sound that sent shivers down Tom's spine. "She is one of us now." "Yef." "You cannot save her." Tom's heart raced as he felt the darkness closing in around him. He turned to run back to the truck, but the figure lunged forward, grabbing his arm with a grip like iron. "Join us," it whispered, its breath cold against Tom's skin. With a surge of adrenaline, Tom broke free and sprinted back to the truck, his heart pounding in his chest. He jumped inside, fumbling with the keys as he tried to start the engine. "Lila, get in!" he shouted, panic rising in his chest. But she stood frozen, her eyes locked on the figure. "I can't leave," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Lila, please," Tom begged, desperation flooding his voice. The figure stepped closer, its hollow eyes fixed on Tom. "You cannot save her. She is ours now." Tom's heart raced as he finally managed to start the engine. He slammed the gas pedal, the truck lurching forward as he sped past Lila and the figure. He glanced in the rearview mirror, his heart sinking as he saw her standing there, lost in the darkness. "Lila!" he shouted, but the words fell on deaf ears. The road stretched on, the darkness closing in around him. Tom's mind raced as he tried to process what had just happened. He had lost her, and the weight of despair settled over him like a shroud. As he drove, the headlights flickered again, and the engine sputtered. "No, no, no!" he shouted, panic rising in his chest. The truck began to slow, and Tom felt a sense of dread wash over him. He pulled over to the side of the road, heart racing as he tried to figure out what was wrong. Suddenly, the radio crackled to life, the DJ's voice filling the cab. "Welcome back, night owls. Just a reminder to keep your eyes peeled for anything unusual out there. You never know what you might encounter on these lonely highways." Tom's heart raced as he realized the words were directed at him. He glanced around, the darkness pressing in on him. The whispers returned, echoing in his mind, urging him to give in to despair. "Join us," they whispered, a chilling chorus that sent shivers down his spine. Tom shook his head, trying to block out the voices. He couldn't let them win. He had to keep driving. With a surge of determination, Tom managed to restart the engine. He pressed on, the road stretching endlessly before him. But the darkness loomed closer, and the whispers grew louder, drowning out his thoughts. As he drove, he caught glimpses of movement in the trees, shadowy figures lurking just out of sight. Panic surged within him, and he felt the weight of despair pressing down on him. Suddenly, the headlights flickered again, and the truck sputtered to a stop. Tom cursed under his breath, gripping the steering wheel tightly. "Come on, come on!" But the engine remained silent, and the darkness closed in around him. He felt a chill run down his spine as he glanced around, the shadows shifting and twisting in the moonlight. "Join us!" the whispers echoed, a haunting melody that filled the air. Tom's heart raced as he realized he was trapped. The darkness surrounded him, and the figures began to emerge from the trees, their hollow eyes fixed on him. "Help!" he shouted, but the words fell on deaf ears. The figures closed in, their laughter echoing in the night. As the figures surrounded him, Tom felt a surge of despair wash over him. He had fought so hard to escape, but now he was trapped in the darkness, lost among the hollow ones. In that moment, he understood. The road had never truly ended. It was a never-ending cycle of despair, drawing in those who wandered too far into the night. And as the darkness consumed him, he knew he would never escape. He was now one of the lost, forever wandering the haunted highways, a prisoner of the hollow ones. Days turned into weeks, and the highway remained silent, the whispers fading into the distance. The truck sat abandoned on the side of the road, a haunting reminder of the souls lost to the darkness. But the cycle would continue. The whispers would call to the next unsuspecting traveler, drawing them into the depths of the night where the shadows danced and the hollow ones awaited. And somewhere deep within the darkness, Tom wandered, forever trapped in the embrace of the hollow ones, his voice lost to the night. The night shift. It was a chilly autumn evening when Mark Thompson pulled into the parking lot of the Crestview Motel, a small, run-down establishment located just off the highway. The neon sign flickered erratically, casting an eerie glow over the cracked pavement. Mark had taken the night shift at the motel to make ends meet, a decision he had made out of necessity rather than desire. He was a college student, struggling to pay tuition and living expenses, and this job seemed like a lifeline. As he stepped out of his car, the wind whispered through the trees, sending a shiver down his spine. The motel was nearly empty, with only a few cars scattered around the lot. The building itself was old, with peeling paint and a musty smell that lingered in the air. Mark grabbed his backpack and made his way to the front desk, where he would spend the next 8 hours. The interior of the motel was dimly lit, with flickering fluorescent lights that buzzed overhead. The front desk was manned by an elderly woman named Doris, who had been working there for as long as anyone could remember. Her gray hair was pulled back into a tight bun, and her eyes were sharp, as if she could see right through you. "Welcome to Crestview Motel," she said, her voice raspy. "You're the new night shift, right?" "Yeah, that's me," Mark replied, trying to sound confident. "Just keep an eye on things." "It can get a little strange at night," Doris warned, her gaze lingering on him for a moment longer than necessary. "Strange how?" Mark asked, raising an eyebrow. "Oh, just the usual. People come and go at odd hours. Sometimes they don't check out when they're supposed to. Just keep the doors locked and don't let anyone in after midnight," she said, her tone serious. Mark nodded, feeling a knot form in his stomach. He had heard stories about motels like this, places where strange things happened, but he brushed it off as just local folklore. He was here to work, not to get spooked. The first few hours of his shift passed uneventfully. Mark spent his time cleaning the lobby, organizing paperwork, and occasionally glancing out the window at the empty parking lot. The highway was quiet, with only the occasional car passing by, its headlights illuminating the darkness for a brief moment before fading away to vigor a man. As the clock struck midnight, Mark felt a sense of unease settle over him. The silence was deafening, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. He tried to distract himself by scrolling through his phone, but the eerie atmosphere made it difficult to focus. Just as he was about to pour himself a cup of coffee, the door swung open, and a man stepped inside. He was tall and disheveled, with dark circles under his eyes and a wild look about him. Mark instinctively took a step back. "Can I help you?" Mark asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "I need a room," the man said, his voice shaky. "I've been driving for hours." Mark hesitated, remembering Doris's warning. "I'm sorry, but we don't take any new guests after midnight." The man's expression shifted from desperation to anger. "I can't sleep in my car. I need a room," he shouted, his voice echoing in the empty lobby. Mark felt a surge of fear, his voice echoing in the empty lobby. "I'm really sorry, but I can't let you in. It's against the rules." The man's eyes narrowed, and for a moment Mark thought he might lunge at him. But then, just as quickly, the anger faded and he turned to leave. "You'll regret this," he muttered under his breath as he stepped back into the night. Mark's heart raced as he locked the door behind him. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about that man. He tried to push the thought aside and focused on his duties, but the unease lingered. As the night wore on, Mark began to notice strange things happening around the motel. The lights flickered more frequently, and he could have sworn he heard whispers coming from the empty rooms. He brushed it off as his imagination running wild, but the feeling of dread continued to grow. Around 2 a.m., he decided to take a walk outside to clear his head. The air was cold and crisp, and the stars twinkled above him. He walked around the parking lot, glancing at the few cars that were parked there. One of them, an old sedan, caught his eye. It had been there since he started his shift, and he couldn't remember seeing anyone get out of it. Curiosity got the better of him, and he approached the car. The windows were tinted, making it impossible to see inside. He knocked lightly on the window, but there was no response. Just as he was about to walk away, he heard a faint sound coming from inside, a soft whimpering. Mark's heart raced as he peered through the window, but he couldn't see anything. He knocked again, this time louder. "Hello? Is someone in there?" he called out. The whimpering stopped abruptly, and an eerie silence fell over the parking lot. Mark took a step back, feeling a chill run down his spine. He decided it was best to return to the safety of the lobby. Back inside, Mark tried to shake off the unsettling feeling. He poured himself another cup of coffee and sat down at the front desk, trying to distract himself with a book. Just as he was getting lost in the pages, the phone rang, startling him. "Crestview Motel," he answered, his voice shaky. "Help me," a woman's voice whispered on the other end. "Please, you have to help me." Mark's heart raced. "Who is this? What's going on?" "I'm in room 12. You have this. What's going on? I'm in room 12. You have to get me out of here." "He's coming for me," the woman said, her voice trembling with fear. "Stay calm. I'll be there in a minute," Mark replied, trying to keep his voice steady. He hung up the phone and grabbed the flashlight from under the desk. Room 12 was at the far end of the motel, and the thought of going there alone sent a wave of fear through him. But he couldn't ignore the woman's plea for help. As he made his way down the dimly lit hallway, the air grew colder, and the shadows seemed to stretch and twist around him. He reached room 12 and knocked on the door. "Hello? It's Mark from the front desk. Are you okay?" There was no response. He knocked again, harder this time. "I'm coming in," he called out, using his key to unlock the door. The room was dark, the curtains drawn tight. Mark switched on the flashlight, illuminating the small space. The bed was unmade, and the bathroom door was slightly ajar. He stepped inside, calling out for the woman, but there was no sign of her. Suddenly, he heard a noise behind him, a soft creaking sound. He turned around, shining the flashlight toward the bathroom. The door swung open slowly, revealing an empty room. Mark's heart raced as he backed away, feeling a sense of dread wash over him. Just as he was about to leave, he heard a voice behind him. "You shouldn't have come here." Mark spun around to find the disheveled man from earlier standing in the doorway, a sinister smile on his face. "I told you you'd regret it." "What do you want?" Mark demanded, trying to sound brave. The man stepped closer, his eyes glinting in the flashlight's beam. "You're in over your head, kid. This place isn't what it seems." Mark's mind raced as he tried to process the situation. "Where's the woman? What did you do to her?" The man laughed, a chilling sound that echoed in the empty room. "She's not here anymore. You should have listened to the rules." Mark felt a surge of panic. He turned to run, but the man lunged at him, grabbing his arm. "You can't leave. You're part of this now." With a surge of adrenaline, Mark broke free and sprinted down the hallway, the man's laughter ringing in his ears. He burst through the front door and into the parking lot, gasping for breath. He glanced back at the motel, the flickering lights casting long shadows behind him. Mark knew he couldn't stay there any longer. He jumped into his car and fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking. Just as he was about to start the engine, he noticed the old sedan again. The driver's side door was now open, and a figure stood beside it. It was the woman from the phone call, her face pale and eyes wide with fear. "Help me!" she cried, her voice desperate. Mark hesitated. torn between the urge to help her and the fear of the man who had chased him. "Get in!" he shouted, and she rushed to the passenger seat, slamming the door behind her. "Drive!" she urged, her voice trembling. Mark didn't need to be told twice. He started the car and sped out of the parking lot, glancing in the rearview mirror. The man stood in the doorway of the motel, watching them with a twisted smile. As they drove down the highway, the woman began to sob. "I thought I was going to die," she said, her voice shaking. "He was going to kill me." "Who was he?" Mark asked, trying to keep his eyes on the road. "I don't know. I just stopped for the night and he came to my room. He said I couldn't leave," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Mark felt a chill run down his spine. "We need to get to the police," he said, his heart racing. They drove for what felt like hours, the woman giving him directions to the nearest police station. When they finally arrived, Mark rushed inside, dragging the woman with him. He explained the situation to the officers, who listened intently. After a few minutes, an officer approached them. "We'll send someone to check out the motel," he said, his expression serious. "But you two need to stay here for your safety." Mark felt a sense of relief wash over him, but it was short-lived. As they waited, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The woman sat beside him, her hands trembling. "Do you think they'll find him?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I hope so," Mark replied, but doubt gnawed at him. Hours passed and the officers returned with grim expressions. "The motel is abandoned," one of them said. "There's no sign of anyone there." "What do you mean?" Mark asked, confusion washing over him. "We just came from there. The man was there. The man was there." The officer shook his head. "The man was there." The officer shook his head. "It's been empty. There's no record of anyone staying there." Mark's heart sank as the realization hit him. The woman's face mirrored his shock. "But I called for help. I saw her," he exclaimed, panic rising in his chest. The officer placed a reassuring hand on Mark's shoulder. "It's okay. We'll figure this out. Just take a deep breath." But Mark couldn't breathe. The weight of the night pressed down on him, and he felt as if he were drowning in a sea of confusion and fear. The woman beside him was silent, her eyes wide with terror. Days turned into weeks, and Mark couldn't shake the events of that night from his mind. He returned to his normal life, but the shadows of the motel haunted him. He tried to convince himself it was just a nightmare, but the memories were too vivid. He often found himself driving past the Crestview Motel, which now stood abandoned and overgrown with weeds. The flickering neon sign had long since gone dark, but he could still see the outline of the building against the night sky. It was as if it were calling to him, beckoning him to uncover its secrets. One evening, unable to resist the pull any longer, Mark parked his car and approached the motel. The air was thick with tension, and the wind howled through the broken windows. He stepped inside, the floorboards creaking beneath his weight. The lobby was just as he remembered it, but the atmosphere was different, heavier, more oppressive. He walked down the hallway, his heart pounding in his chest. Room 12 loomed ahead, and he felt an inexplicable urge to open the door. With trembling hands, he inserted the key he had taken from the front desk. The door creaked open, revealing the dark room. He stepped inside, shining his flashlight around. The bed was unmade, and the bathroom door was ajar, just as it had been that night, and the bathroom door was ajar, just as it had been that night. Suddenly, he heard a noise behind him, a soft whisper, "Help me!" Mark spun around, his heart racing. The woman stood there, her face pale and eyes wide with fear. "You shouldn't have come back," she said, her voice trembling. "Where have you been?" Mark asked, confusion flooding his mind. "I'm trapped here," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "He won't let me leave." Mark felt a chill run down his spine. "Who?" "The man." She nodded, her eyes filled with terror. He's always watching. You have to get out of here before it's too late. Mark's mind raced as he tried to process her words. I can't leave you here, he said, desperation creeping into his voice. You don't understand. If you stay, he'll come for you too, she warned, her voice rising in panic. Just then, the door slammed shut behind him and the lights flickered ominously. Mark's heart raced as he turned to face the darkness. The man appeared in the doorway, a twisted smile on his face. You shouldn't have come back, he said, his voice low and menacing. Now you're part of this. Mark felt a surge of fear as he backed away, but the woman grabbed his arm. We have to go, she cried, pulling him toward the window. The man lunged at them, but Mark managed to push the window open. They climbed out just as he reached them, landing hard on the ground outside. Mark scrambled to his feet, pulling the woman with him as they ran toward the parking lot. They reached the car, and Mark fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking. Just as he started the engine, he glanced back at the motel. The man stood in the doorway, watching them with a sinister grin. As they sped away, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that they were being followed. The woman sat beside him, her face pale and eyes wide with fear. He's not going to let us go, she whispered. Mark's heart raced as he drove faster, the highway stretching out before them. But no matter how far they drove, he couldn't escape the feeling that the man was still watching, lurking in the shadows. Weeks turned into months, and Mark tried to return to a normal life. He finished his classes and graduated, but the memories of that night haunted him. He often found himself staring out the window, lost in thought, wondering what had really happened at the Crestview Motel. The woman had vanished from his life, leaving him with more questions than answers. He tried to report the incident to the police again, but they dismissed his claims, insisting that the motel had been closed for years. No one believed him, and he felt increasingly isolated. One night, unable to sleep, Mark decided to drive back to the motel one last time. The air was thick with fog, and the moon hung low in the sky as he approached the abandoned building. The neon sign flickered weakly, casting an eerie glow over the parking lot. As he stepped inside, the familiar sense of dread washed over him. The lobby was just as he remembered it, but the atmosphere felt heavier, more oppressive. He walked down the hallway, his heart pounding in his chest. When he reached room 12, he hesitated for a moment before opening the door. The room was dark and the air was thick with dust. He switched on his flashlight, illuminating the space. Suddenly, he heard a noise behind him, a soft whisper, "Help me." Mark spun around, his heart racing. The woman stood there, her face pale and eyes wide with fear. "You shouldn't have come back," she said, her voice trembling. "Where have you been?" Mark asked, confusion flooding his mind. "I'm trapped here," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "He won't let me leave." Mark felt a chill run down his spine. "Who?" He won't. Mark felt a chill run down his spine. "Who?" "The man." She nodded, her eyes filled with terror. "You have to get out of here before it's too late." Mark felt a surge of panic. "I can't leave you here," he said, desperation creeping into his voice. "You don't understand. If you stay, he'll come for you too," she warned, her voice rising in panic. Just then, the door slammed shut behind him, and the lights flickered ominously. Mark's heart raced as he turned to face the darkness. The man appeared in the doorway, a twisted smile on his face. "You shouldn't have come back," he said, his voice low and menacing. "Now you're part of this." Mark felt a surge of fear as he backed away, but the woman grabbed his arm. "We have to go," she cried, pulling him toward the window. The man lunged at them, but Mark managed to push the window open. They climbed out just as he reached them, landing hard on the ground outside. Mark scrambled to his feet, pulling the woman with him as they ran toward the parking lot. They reached the car, and Mark fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking. Just as he started the engine, he glanced back at the motel. The man stood in the doorway, watching them with a sinister grin. As they sped away, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that they were being followed. The woman sat beside him, her face pale and eyes wide with fear. "He's not going to let us go," she whispered. Mark's heart raced as he drove faster, the highway stretching out before them. But no matter how far they drove, he couldn't escape the feeling that the man was still watching, lurking in the shadows. Months passed, and Mark tried to move on with his life. He graduated college and found a job, but the memories of that night at the Crestview Motel haunted him. He often found himself staring out the window, lost in thought, wondering what had really happened. Trip to the suicide forest. They say that some places hold the weight of countless lost souls, that the ground beneath your feet can remember the echoes of despair, the silent prayers no one ever answered. I never believed any of it until I went to Aokigahara, Japan's infamous suicide forest. It was unnatural, like the forest was breathing on its own. I saw shapes, or thought I did. A dark silhouette beyond the trees, standing so still it merged with the shadows. When I blinked, it vanished. My heartbeat drummed in my ears as I told myself it was a trick of light, paranoia fueled by the stories I'd read. And then the whispering started, faint at first, so soft I couldn't be sure it wasn't just the rustle of leaves, but it grew clearer. A chorus of barely audible voices pleading, crying, calling. I froze. My skin prickled, but there was no one, no living thing around me, just dark trunks and impossibly thick shadows. I wanted to leave. But something rooted me in place. The deeper I ventured, the more disoriented I became. The forest twisted in ways that didn't make sense. Paths looped back on themselves, rocks and roots rearranged in the corners of my eyes. My compass spun uselessly as if caught in something unseen. At one point, I stumbled across a clearing. In its center stood an old tree, its bark cracked and blackened with age, roots like giant fingers clawing into the earth. Hanging from its branches were dozens of small, worn statues, Jizo statues, guardians of lost children and travelers. Some were broken, others covered in endless layers of moss or dirt. Their faces were calm, but their eyes seemed to follow my movements. Suddenly, the whispering encompassed me, desperate, hungry, a long-lost chorus begging for remembrance or release. My mind threatened to crack under the pressure, and I hurried away, trying to choke down the rising panic. I was almost back when I saw it for sure, a flicker moving just beyond the trees at the edge of my vision, a figure in dark clothing, no face visible in the gloom. It didn't move like a person but glided, light as a shadow itself. I stopped and scanned the forest, nothing. When I turned back, the figure was gone, but then a weathered shoe lay alone on the path. I had passed it before. How had it gotten here? My breath quickened. I told myself it was stress, exhaustion, a trick of my imagination. I forced myself to keep moving. I finally broke through the tree line an hour before sunset, exhausted and shaken. My hands trembled as I locked my phone to check the time. I had been inside for over 6 hours, and the forest had left something heavy inside me. Fear, sadness, doubt. I didn't speak to anyone on the way back. The town felt sterile compared to the forest's rawness. From the moment I stepped beneath its canopy, something inside me shifted. The oppressive darkness wasn't just the absence of sunlight, but something deeper, something alive. My name is Michael. I'm just an ordinary guy, curious, maybe a bit reckless, driven by a desire to see what others fear. I checked into a small, nondescript hotel along a quiet street, not far from the base of Fuji. My room was plain, minimal furniture, the faint scent of disinfectant. I hoped the isolation would quiet my nerves. Instead, the quiet felt too complete, oppressive almost. That night, I barely slept. A persistent dripping sound echoed somewhere in the room, water pipe or my imagination. My eyes snapped open multiple times, catching glimpses of movement. Faint shadows flickered near the corners of the ceiling and walls, impossible to pinpoint. I chalked it up to exhaustion and stress, but when I checked my phone, the battery drained rapidly without explanation. In the small hours, a whispered voice barely louder than a breath called my name. Michael! It was so soft I froze in bed, too terrified to move but unable to ignore it. My skin crawled. I sat up, eyes straining in the dark. The voice came again, closer. Don't forget us. A chill swept over me. I switched on the light, glaring into the darkness. Nothing. No one. Over the next days, I noticed strange things happening around the room. Books I'd left on the floor were stacked neatly by morning. My camera would switch itself on. Photos I didn't take appeared on the screen. Blurred images of the forest, twisted branches, empty paths with shadows looming at the edges. I heard rustling when no one else was there. Doors creaked open by themselves. I felt like I was being watched, the cold presence creeping closer, invading my thoughts. Friends back home sent messages asking if I was okay. I wanted to tell them what was happening but couldn't find the words without sounding insane. One night, I awoke to see a figure standing at the foot of my bed. Pale, indistinct. I blinked and it vanished. Heart pounding, I jumped up and looked around. My eyes landed on the mirror across the room. The glass wasn't reflecting the room accurately. In its depth, I saw flickering images overlapping reality. Faces contorted with sadness, hands pressed against invisible walls, eyes begging for help. I reached tentatively toward the mirror. The reflection rippled like water. I pulled back, shaking. Sleep became impossible. During the day, I felt the forest's grasp tightening, memories bleeding into every moment. Strange, unshakable feelings of dread and sorrow overwhelmed me. The whispers moved from the quiet hours into daylight shadows. A voice called me again and again, sometimes in the crowd of a busy street, sometimes in the soft hum of a busy cafe. I could no longer tell if the torment came from outside or inside my own mind. On the last night before I was due to return home, the presence became unbearable. When I booked my trip to Japan, Aokigahara was just another stop on the itinerary. The suicide forest, a morbid curiosity at first. But it became more than that, something I couldn't have anticipated. I reached the outskirts of the forest early in the morning, imandasting. I stayed in bed, shutting my eyes tight, begging for peace. But the forest, the loss, the shadows, they came back to claim their place in my thoughts. Remember us, they whispered over and over. I saw the woman again, the mother from among the trees, her eyes full of sorrow, accusing yet pleading. I wanted to scream. I wanted to forget. But it was too late. I checked out the next morning, heart hammering, spine tight with fear. I told myself it was all in my head. I boarded the plane, but the quiet voice still echoed. Sometimes at night, I swear I hear it. Sometimes, in the silence, a shadow crosses the corner of my vision. From that day on, I still remain thinking about it. What did I bring back with me? Was it just fear or something far worse? And sometimes, when the silence presses close, I wonder, did the forest ever really let me go? Weeks passed after I returned home, but the shadows lingered. I tried to resume my life, but the memories of Aokigahara haunted me. I avoided mirrors, fearing what I might see. I stopped taking photos, convinced that the camera captured more than just images. It captured the essence of the forest, the sorrow that clung to me like a second skin. I began to notice changes in myself. I was more irritable, quick to anger. Friends commented on my distant demeanor, but I brushed it off. I felt like a ghost in my own life, drifting through days without truly living. One evening, I sat alone in my apartment, the weight of the silence pressing down on me. I decided to revisit the photos I had taken before the trip, hoping to find some semblance of normalcy. As I scrolled through the images, I felt a chill creep up my spine. The photos were different, distorted, faces twisted in agony, shadows creeping in from the edges. I slammed my laptop shut, heart racing. I couldn't escape it. The forest had seeped into my life, and I was powerless to stop it. Desperate for answers, I sought out a local historian who specialized in the lore of Aokigahara. I found her in a small, cluttered office filled with books and artifacts. Her name was Dr. Sato, and she had a reputation for understanding the forest's dark history. "Many who enter Aokigahara do not return unchanged," she said, her voice steady but laced with concern. "The forest has a way of drawing out the pain within us, amplifying it until it consumes us." I told her everything, the whispers, the shadows, the feeling of being watched. She listened intently, her expression grave. "You must confront what you brought back," she advised. Mount Fuji peeked over the horizon, the snow on its peak sharp and white against the cobalt sky. The air was crisp, cold in a way that made my breath frosty and visible. I took a deep breath, steadying my nerves. Some locals had warned me not to go deep, not to linger. The forest is not just a place, it's a reflection of our inner turmoil. You must face your fears, or they will consume you. That night, I returned home, determined to confront whatever darkness had followed me. I set up a small altar in my living room, lighting candles and placing items that represented my fears, my insecurities, my regrets. I closed my eyes and focused on the whispers, inviting them in. "Show me," I whispered into the darkness. "Show me what you want." As the candles flickered, the room grew cold. The shadows deepened, swirling around me like a storm. I felt a presence, heavy and suffocating, pressing down on my chest. The whispers grew louder, a cacophony of voices pleading, crying, accusing. "Michael," they called, echoing through the room. "You cannot escape." I opened my eyes, and the room transformed. I was no longer in my apartment, but back in Aokigahara, standing before the old tree with the Jizo statues. The air was thick with despair, and the faces of the lost surrounded me, their eyes filled with sorrow. "Help us," they begged, their voices merging into a haunting melody. I felt their pain, their longing for release. I wanted to help them, to ease their suffering, but I was paralyzed by fear. The shadows closed in, and I realized I was becoming one of them, lost, forgotten, trapped in the forest's grasp. "No!" I screamed, but the words were swallowed by the darkness. I awoke in my apartment, drenched in sweat, heart racing. The shadows were gone, but the weight of their presence lingered. I stumbled to the mirror, terrified of what I might see. My reflection stared back, but it felt wrong, hollow, as if I were looking at a stranger. Days turned into weeks, and I felt myself slipping further away from reality. I stopped going out, stopped answering calls. The whispers returned, echoing in my mind, taunting me. "You cannot escape." I tried to convince myself it was just stress, just the remnants of a bad experience. But deep down, I knew the truth. The forest had claimed a part of me, and I was powerless to reclaim it. One night, as I lay in bed, I felt a cold breeze sweep through the room. The whispers returned, clearer than ever. "Remember us, help us." I sat up, heart pounding. The shadows danced along the walls, twisting and turning, forming shapes that felt familiar. I realized then that I was not alone. The forest had followed me home, and it would never let me go. I closed my eyes, tears streaming down my face. I had tried to escape, but the darkness was a part of me now. I could feel it wrapping around my heart, squeezing tighter with each passing day. But warnings felt like intrigue. At the forest's edge, the path was lined with ancient stone lanterns, their surfaces weathered by time, half covered in moss and vines. The ground was littered thick with pine needles, soft under my boots. From that day on, I still remained thinking about it. What did I bring back with me? Was it just fear or something far worse? And sometimes when the silence presses close, I wonder, did the forest ever really let me go? The canopy above was dense branches woven like a giant's net, swallowing much of the light. Inside, the temperature dropped. The air held a dampness that smelled like earth and forgotten things. The forest was eerily silent. No bird song, no insect hum. Only the sound of footsteps punctuated the quiet mine. It made it feel like the forest was holding its breath. As I stepped in, I couldn't shake the feeling that the trees were watching me, standing sentinel over secrets too heavy to carry alone. The first signs of human presence were subtle. Small bundles of shoes dumped near the trail, weathered notes pinned to bark with rusted nails, names written in shaky handwriting, drawings I couldn't decipher, sometimes just blank scraps soaked by rain. One note said simply, "Please forgive me." Another, "Don't follow me." The weight in those words made my throat tighten. Deeper inside, the trails grew harder to follow. Branches knocked softly against each other in the stillness, but the wind didn't move. Thanks for watching. The veil between our world and theirs is thinner than you think. Each like, each share, each subscription strengthens the connection. Feed the channel before it feeds on you.